fears the amount of gun violence that has happened. I think we're reaching a tipping point where we're about to hit desensitization to gun violence.
Now to a major ruling involving the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court struck down a New York law.
The Supreme Court heard arguments Tuesday on whether a 1994 law that strips gun access from alleged domestic abusers
that's the same claptrap that they have been using for 20 years.
It's an opportunity for the court to clarify its 2022 decision in the Bruin case that
Supreme Court revisits gun laws. The landscape of gun legislation in the United States underwent a seismic shift with the Supreme Court's landmark Bruin decision in June 2022. This pivotal ruling reshaped the parameters by which gun laws are evaluated, ushering in a significant departure from the conventional assessments based on public safety considerations. In the wake of Bruin, the case of U.S. v. Rahimi stands as a critical litmus test, embodying the implications and challenges arising from the newly adopted assessment criteria. Bruin fundamentally altered the criteria for evaluating the constitutionality of gun laws, prioritizing historical tradition as a guiding principle rather than solely considering public safety concerns. This transformative shift catapulted lower courts into uncharted territory, compelling them to grapple with interpreting and applying this novel approach. The emphasis on historical precedent presented a challenge in determining the alignment of contemporary firearm regulations with historical practices, leading to a divergence in judicial interpretations. The Bruin decision, with its focus on historical tradition, provoked a ripple effect across the legal landscape. Lower courts found themselves confronted with a new framework that reframed the discussion around Second Amendment rights and the legitimacy of gun control measures. This departure from the conventional balancing act between public safety and gun ownership rights has injected uncertainty into established firearm regulations. The ramifications of Bruin transcended mere legal discourse, sparking debates, criticisms, and challenges to existing gun control laws. Advocates on both sides of the gun control spectrum seized upon the ambiguity created by this shift, leveraging it to contest the constitutionality of various firearm restrictions.
Now to a major ruling involving the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court struck down a New York law.
Gun violence is surging across the U.S.
Fear of losing your life when you leave is real. It's a real fear.
Fears the amount of gun violence that has happened. I think we're reaching a tipping point where we're about to hit desensitization to gun violence.
Consequently, the U.S. v. Rahimi case emerges as a crucible, where the implications of the Bruin decision play out in real-world legal scenarios. The case encapsulates the tension between historical precedents and contemporary concerns surrounding firearms, specifically revolving around the constitutionality of restricting firearm possession for individuals under domestic violence protection orders. As the Supreme Court revisits gun laws in the aftermath of Bruin, the implications of this redefined evaluation criterion loom large. The outcome of U.S. v. Rahimi holds the potential to set a precedent, shaping the trajectory of future Second Amendment cases and wielding substantial influence over the interpretation and validity of existing and forthcoming firearm regulations. Domestic violence restraining orders. The case of U.S. v. Rahimi encapsulates a high-stakes legal battle centered on the constitutionality of restricting firearm possession for individuals subject to domestic violence protection orders. At its core lies the pivotal question of whether prohibiting firearm ownership for those under such orders aligns with constitutional principles or infringes upon Second Amendment rights. This legal debate holds immense significance, particularly concerning the safety and well-being of individuals affected by domestic violence. The federal law in question serves as a crucial safeguard, aiming to protect victims and avert potentially life-threatening situations within domestic settings. By restricting firearm possession for individuals under domestic violence protection orders, the law seeks to mitigate the risk of further violence or harm. It acknowledges the well-documented correlation between access to firearms and increased lethality in domestic disputes. Studies consistently highlight the heightened risk of fatalities when firearms are present in instances of domestic violence, underscoring the urgency of effective preventive measures. In the context of U.S. v. Rahimi, the legal scrutiny focuses on the balance between safeguarding vulnerable individuals and upholding Second Amendment rights. The case shines a spotlight on the delicate equilibrium between ensuring public safety, particularly for victims of domestic hurt, and respecting individual rights to firearm ownership. The law under contention operates as a crucial preventive tool within the realm of domestic violence. It serves not only to protect victims directly named in protection orders, but also acts as a deterrent against escalating violence within intimate partner relationships. By curbing access to firearms for individuals deemed at risk of perpetrating domestic violence, the law aims to interrupt potential tragedies and save lives. The case's significance extends beyond the legal sphere, resonating deeply within communities affected by domestic violence. It highlights the pivotal role of legislation in addressing and mitigating the impact of domestic attacks, especially in scenarios where the presence of firearms escalates the risk of harm. As the Supreme Court deliberates on the constitutional validity of restricting firearm possession under domestic violence protection orders, the ruling of U.S. v. Rahimi holds immense implications. It will not only shape the contours of this specific law, but also potentially set precedent and guide the development of future legislation aimed at protecting vulnerable individuals in domestic settings. SC's Historical Tradition Test. The Supreme Court's Bruin decision represents a seismic shift in the evaluation of Second Amendment cases, introducing a new criterion that places substantial emphasis on aligning contemporary firearm regulations with historical traditions. This paradigmatic change in assessment has triggered significant legal battles, with Rahimi's case among those challenging established gun control laws based on historical precedent. The Bruin decision fundamentally reshapes the landscape of how courts approach and adjudicate Second Amendment cases. It establishes a stringent criterion requiring contemporary firearm regulations to align with historical practices and traditions of gun regulation. This departure from previous assessment methodologies, which primarily considered public safety concerns, injects historical context as a crucial determinant of the constitutionality of gun laws. This redefinition of evaluation criteria has unleashed a cascade of legal challenges targeting various gun control laws across different jurisdictions. Laws that were previously considered settled or uncontroversial now face scrutiny, as litigants leverage the historical tradition test introduced by Bruin to contest their validity. Rahimi's case exemplifies this trend, serving as a focal point for questioning the constitutionality of restricting firearm possession for individuals under domestic violence protection orders.
The Supreme Court heard arguments Tuesday on whether a 1994 law that strips gun access from alleged domestic abusers.
Oftentimes the difference between a battered woman and a dead woman is the presence of a gun in the household.
This decision has made every single one of us less safe from gun violence.
Pre-logger that this is a law that is very important in ferreting out domestic violence.
The introduction of historical tradition as a benchmark for assessing the legitimacy of gun regulations has sparked debates and raised complexities within the legal landscape. Courts are tasked with navigating the historical nuances of firearm regulations, drawing comparisons between contemporary laws and practices prevalent during the nation's founding era. This entails extensive examination and interpretation of historical records, posing challenges in determining the applicability of historical precedents to modern-day firearm legislation. As courts grapple with interpreting and applying the historical tradition test introduced by the Bruin decision, the legal landscape surrounding gun regulations remains in flux. The outcome of cases such as Rahimi's carries significant implications, not just for the specific laws under scrutiny, but also for the broader interpretation and evolution of Second Amendment jurisprudence in the United States. Rahimi case. The crux of the Rahimi case lies in the challenge posed against a federal law that imposes restrictions on firearm possession for individuals under domestic violence protection orders. At its core, this legal battle encapsulates a delicate balancing act between safeguarding Second Amendment rights and addressing the imperative to protect individuals vulnerable to domestic violence. Zaki Rahimi's challenge to this federal law places emphasis on the constitutional rights granted by the Second Amendment, which protects an individual's right to bear arms. Rahimi's contention raises fundamental questions about the extent to which these rights may be curtailed or restricted, especially in cases where individuals are subject to legal restraints due to domestic violence concerns. On the opposing side of the legal spectrum lies the imperative to ensure the safety and well-being of individuals affected by domestic violence. The federal law in question seeks to prevent potential harm or lethal outcomes by restricting firearm possession for those under domestic violence protection orders. It acknowledges the heightened risk associated with allowing individuals in such situations to have access to firearms, considering the alarming statistics linking firearms to increased lethality in domestic disputes. The case thus confronts the judiciary with a challenging dilemma, weighing the constitutional rights enshrined in the Second Amendment against the urgent need to protect individuals vulnerable to domestic violence. It demands a nuanced examination of the limitations that can be imposed on Second Amendment rights without compromising public safety, especially in scenarios where domestic disputes have the potential to turn lethal when firearms are involved. The outcome of the Rahimi case holds significant implications for the broader discourse on the intersection of Second Amendment rights and public safety measures. It requires the courts to navigate the intricate balance between upholding constitutional rights and implementing measures to prevent harm within domestic settings. As the Supreme Court deliberates on the constitutional validity of restricting firearm possession for individuals under domestic violence protection orders, the ruling in Rahimi's case is poised to set a precedent. It will shape the contours of this particular law and potentially establish guidelines for future legislation aimed at balancing individual rights with the imperative to safeguard vulnerable populations from the heightened risks associated with firearms in domestic violence scenarios. Supreme Court weighs in on firearms. You know that U.S. versus Rahimi case making waves? It's a serious dive into the murky waters of gun ownership, tangled up with the tough realities of domestic violence. Picture this: a legal showdown that's not just about laws and rights, it's about people's safety, especially when firearms are in the mix. This case isn't just some courtroom drama, it's a bright red flag waving at the intersection where guns and domestic disputes collide. The Supreme Court's got the hot seat in this case, and the decision they make about restricting firearm possession for folks under domestic violence protection orders could be a game changer. This isn't just about courts and laws, it's about society taking a hard look at how we handle gun access in scenarios where domestic violence is a harsh reality. It's like trying to walk a tightrope between respecting someone's rights to have a gun and making sure folks facing tough situations at home stay out of harm's way. What makes this whole thing even more intense is that the Supreme Court isn't just deciding a case, they're shaping the future. They're at the forefront of figuring out how to navigate this tangled web where people's lives are on the line, and the balance between rights and safety feels like walking on eggshells. Imagine the impact of their decision, how it'll shape laws, policy, and more importantly, people's lives. It's not just about Rahimi, it's about setting a precedent, paving the way for how we handle similar situations down the road. This case is urging everyone to sit up and take notice, to rethink how we approach gun access when domestic violence is a real concern. It's a call for a balance, a delicate dance where rights meets responsibilities, where safety isn't compromised for the sake of owning a firearm. So when we talk about U.S. versus Rahimi, it's not just a legal tussle, it's a wake-up call. It's about acknowledging the sobering statistics and realizing that decisions made in those courtrooms have ripples that reach far beyond. They touch lives, shape futures, and set the tone for how we handle these tough, real-world situations. Historical precedent versus modern interpretation. In the legal rumble of U.S. versus Rahimi, there's a heavyweight clash brewing between the old and the new in terms of gun control laws. It's a showdown where the courtroom's buzzing with debate. Should we stick to historical traditions or adapt to the pressing challenges of our time? On one side of the ring, there's this emphasis on historical precedent. It's like saying, let's stick to what our predecessors did when it came to regulating firearms. This approach leans heavily on understanding how gun regulations were handled in the past, mirroring those practices in today's legal decisions. But here's the thing. This historical lens often clashes with the realities we face now, particularly concerning domestic violence and guns. In the Rahimi case, legal arguments are wrestling with this tension. It's not just about interpreting laws, it's about finding a balance between the playbook of yesteryears and the pressing issues of today.
It's an opportunity for the court to clarify its 2022 decision in the Bruin case
that's the same claptrap that they have been using for 20 years.
Vastly expanded Second Amendment rights and pretty much changed the way courts around the country handle these challenges.
It's the criminals that are causing the violence and the gun problem.
It's like trying to merge what history tells us about gun regulation with the urgent need to address contemporary challenges, especially in the realm of domestic violence. The legal tussle isn't confined to abstract concepts. It's about grappling with real-world problems. The argument isn't just about phrases and paragraphs in old statutes. It's about safeguarding people's lives today. It's akin to saying we value tradition, but we've got to find a way to keep people safe now, especially in situations where domestic conflicts intersect with firearms. So while the legal eagles battle it out in Rahimi, it's not just a showdown of legal theories. It's a struggle to strike a balance between respecting the past and tackling the challenges of the present. It's like trying to blend the old-school rules with the complexities and urgencies of today, particularly in ensuring the safety of individuals amidst the turbulent landscape of domestic disputes. The Bruin effect. The aftermath of the Supreme Court's Bruin decision in 2022 has stirred up quite the storm in the realm of gun laws. It's like this legal earthquake that's shaking up how we assess and interpret regulations, creating ripples of uncertainty that are felt across different states. So what's the big deal with Bruin? Well, it threw a curveball in how courts should evaluate gun laws. Instead of the usual checklist that looked at things like public safety, Bruin pumped the brakes and said, hey, let's check if these laws match up with our historical way of dealing with firearms. That shift has left lower courts scratching their heads, trying to figure out what that means for existing regulations. In the wake of Bruin, it's like a puzzle with pieces scattered all over. Different courts are interpreting this historical alignment thing in their own ways. It's created this big question mark hanging over the fate of existing gun regulations across states. Some laws are getting the green light, others are being put under the microscope, and some are caught in this gray area where nobody's really sure what's what. This uncertainty is like a ripple effect. What happens in one state might not be the same in another. Gun laws that were once crystal clear are suddenly up for debate because of this historical precedent angle. It's almost like each court is trying to interpret history in its own way, and that's causing this whole mess of varied rulings and challenges to established gun regulations. Thanks to Bruin, it's a bit like the Wild West out there in terms of interpreting gun laws. The Supreme Court's new direction has created this maze where the way forward isn't quite clear yet. It's a legal roller coaster that's got everyone, courts, legislators, and gun rights advocates, trying to make sense of how to navigate this new historical benchmark set by the bigwigs at the top. Rahimi's legal dilemma. In the swirling legal storm of Rahimi's case, there's this heavyweight bout going on. On one side, the urgent call for public safety, and on the other, the defense for Second Amendment rights. It's like this clash between safeguarding lives and protecting the right to bear arms. Let's break it down. Rahimi's case isn't just about a person challenging a law. It's a battleground where the need to ensure public safety by restricting firearm possession for those seen as risky meets head-on with the constitutional right to own guns. One side of the argument focuses on the urgency of protecting people from potential harm. It's like saying, hey, let's prevent dangerous individuals from having access to firearms to keep everyone safe. This viewpoint hinges on the idea that restricting gun possession for those considered risky is crucial to prevent potential harm, especially in cases involving domestic violence or similar volatile situations. On the flip side, there's this staunch defense of Second Amendment rights. It's about saying, hold up, folks have the right to bear arms and that right shouldn't be messed with.
Ever since the Supreme Court ruled there's an individual right to bear arms, there has been a lot of confusion in the lower courts.
It's not the gun owner, it's not the carry pistol permit holders.
Over what kind of gun laws are constitutional. This case could provide some much needed guidance for some of those other gun regulations.
In the case that this ran afoul of the Second Amendment, but really what this case provided.
That wound on my chest that I look at every morning would have been a gunshot wound, and I would not be standing in front of you all today.
This argument champions the idea that limitations on firearm ownership should be minimal, respecting the constitutional right to own guns without unnecessary restrictions. In Rahimi's case, this clash isn't just legal banter, it's about finding a balance, a way to uphold public safety without trampling on fundamental rights. It's like trying to thread a needle. How do we ensure people's safety without compromising on their constitutional freedoms? This legal tug-of-war isn't just about Rahimi, it's about setting a precedent that will ripple through similar cases and impact how we interpret laws that navigate the delicate balance between protecting people and respecting constitutional rights. Rahimi's legal dilemma isn't just a courtroom drama, it's a defining moment where the courts grapple with the core values of safeguarding lives while upholding the essence of constitutional rights. It's this tightrope walk between ensuring safety and honoring the principles laid out in the fabric of the Constitution. Implications of U.S. versus Rahimi. In the judicial tussle of U.S. versus Rahimi, there's more at stake than just legal jargon. It's a case that could have profound implications for victims of domestic violence, directly influencing the effectiveness of measures put in place to protect them. Consider this. Domestic violence incidents involving firearms are like ticking time explosives waiting to explode into tragedy. The ability of courts to limit firearm possession for individuals under domestic violence protective orders is often seen as a critical safety net. It's like a shield, a way to prevent potentially lethal situations from escalating by restricting access to firearms for those considered risky. But Rahimi's challenge throws this safety net into question. This case isn't just about Rahimi, it's about the countless victims and survivors of domestic violence whose safety hinges on the effectiveness of legal measures. It's about ensuring that protective orders aren't just pieces of paper, but hold real power in shielding individuals from harm. Rahimi's challenge serves as a litmus test, a gauge of our commitment to combating domestic violence effectively. It's a moment where we assess whether the legal system can adapt and evolve to safeguard vulnerable individuals, especially when firearms are part of the equation. The implications of Rahimi's challenge stretch far beyond the courtroom. It's about the lives of those affected by domestic violence, about whether we can fortify protective measures to truly shield individuals from harm. It's a chance for the legal system to reinforce its commitment to safeguarding the vulnerable and ensuring that the dangers posed by firearms in domestic violence situations are met with robust preventive measures. Ultimately, the decision in Rahimi's case holds the power to shape the safety and well-being of countless individuals grappling with the harrowing realities of domestic violence. Forecasting the Supreme Court's ruling. As we eagerly await the Supreme Court's ruling in U.S. versus Rahimi, scheduled for June or July 2024, the legal world braces for the impact this decision might wield. This ruling isn't just a solitary event, it's a compass guiding the future of Second Amendment challenges and the terrain of gun control laws. Think of it as a key turning point that could shape how courts handle similar cases in the years to come. The anticipation surrounding Rahimi's ruling is akin to awaiting a pivotal chapter in the gripping saga. It's not just about the immediate outcome, it's about the narrative it sets for future legal battles over gun control measures. The decision expected in June or July isn't merely ink on paper, it's a forecast of how Second Amendment challenges will be interpreted and addressed by the courts. Rahimi's ruling is poised to leave a lasting imprint, akin to a landmark in the legal landscape. It's a marker in time, signaling how laws concerning firearms will be scrutinized and shaped by the precedents set forth in this case. Whether it fortifies Second Amendment rights or bolsters the regulation of firearm possession, this ruling has the potential to redefine the parameters within which future legal debates on gun control unfold. So as the clock ticks toward June or July 2024, the anticipation continues to build, not just for the outcome of Rahimi's case, but for the resonance it will carry in the ongoing saga of Second Amendment challenges and the evolution of gun control legislation. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.